Mark. You solve a lot of difficult and complex behavioral problems, and you don't use obedience. Can you talk about why you don't? And especially in light of the fact that so many owners are really taught that obedience is the way to solve problems, or is part of is a tool for solving those sorts of difficult behavioral issues.
Sure. So first of all, let me say up front, sometimes I sound very anti-obedience in the way I talk. And first of all, there certainly is a place for obedience, especially if you think about dogs that have to walk through high traffic areas and whatnot. Being able to heel and sit and that type of thing can be very useful. Also, of course, sometimes people end up thinking like, well, the guy probably doesn't know how to teach obedience. And, I've won 3 national championships with competitive dog training, canine work that involved obedience, protection, and tracking. And so I know how to teach obedience pretty well. But one of the things that I think is that trying to use obedience as a tool to solve behavior problems is using the wrong tool. And part of the reason I think this is because when I competed, I was competing with other people who had dogs they had spent thousands of dollars on. Dog training was their hobby. They spent tremendous amount of hours doing that training. Almost all of them went to different seminars and stuff with very high-level trainers to learn how to do it. And yet, even after 2 or 3 years of that, a whole lot of people failed obedience exercises in a trial. The dog didn't sit when it needed to, down when it needed to, whatever else. So really, aside from the fact of whether or not obedience is even a good tool to use to solve problems, the idea that the average person in 6 or 8 or 10 weeks with the average dog is going to get so good at obedience that their dog always does it when they need it to just doesn't make sense if those people who put so much more into it aren't routinely consistent. Beyond that, though, I think about the idea of talking to the dog about behavior. And so I mean that both in literal words, but also in how we're responding to behavior. And as an example, one of the things that we really focus on is what we call free behavior. And free behavior is what a dog just does when it's left on its own. Nobody's telling it what to do, nobody's got it on leash, restricting it, whatever else. What does the dog do? And it's very hard to get from obedience, if you're even successful in teaching it, to free behavior. And free behavior is how people want to live with their dogs for the most part. So as an example, somebody comes in the door and your dog, rushes the door, barks, carries on, jumps on people, whatever else. Obedience is this structure that you lay over that behavior, where you tell the dog, sit down, go to place, or whatever else. And in that, you actually never tell the dog about how to greet people. If you think about 2 dogs who go up and greet each other well, nobody's telling them what to do. And they don't sit, and they don't down, and they don't go to place. They just go up and greet. So what I find happens is the obedience actually interferes with talking to the dog about what you actually care about. Go up to people and greet them relatively gently. Go up to people and greet them without jumping on them. Go up to people and greet them relatively calmly, not running circles, jumping up and down, barking and carrying on. Likewise, if we want a dog to be calm about, let's say, motorcycles or the UPS truck, if we make the dog sit, we may have some success in controlling the dog with sit, but we're never really teaching the dog how to think and feel differently about the UPS truck. And so the obedience actually gets in the way of us having a conversation with the dog about how to be okay with the UPS truck. That, those are normal things and they're good and they come and go. It's nothing to be afraid of. It's nothing to chase after. So I find that actually obedience is very, very difficult for people to get proficient enough at that it would really solve problems if it can. And in most cases, actually doing the obedience interferes with talking to the dog about what we really want. A really classic example of where we see this, we do a lot of relaxation work. And we both reward dogs for relaxing, we help guide dogs to relaxation, we do a number of therapies that teach dogs how to be able to let go of energy and relax on their own. And what we find is the dogs that have had the most obedience have the most trouble understanding that we're trying to talk to them about their emotional state and relaxing. They get really locked into the idea that you must be talking to me about a position. And so that's a really good example where it gets in the way of trying to talk about what we really want to with the dog. Another thing that I find that's interesting is, let's just say as an example, if somebody lives in a fairly dense, let's say urban kind of environment, or a suburban townhouse apartment area where there's a lot of density, there's certainly a lot of benefit to having obedience. But if you teach the dog to be comfortable, calm, and relaxed about all the things in its environment, then it's very easy to teach the obedience. But where obedience trainers run into a lot of problem, and where owners run into a lot of problem, is when they're trying to teach the obedience to the dog who is very wound up about those things in the environment. And that actually creates a lot of conflict, whether they're using food reward or they're using some kind of pressure to get the dog to do it. Because now it's like trying to teach a kid math on the school playground. The kid is totally got his brain elsewhere, his energy is all wound up and everything, and it's very hard for him to learn the math, or in this case the obedience. If you teach the dog how to be calm, comfortable, and relaxed around that stuff, then teaching it the obedience that could be useful is really easy and takes much, much less time, and the dog easily does it much, much better. So really I find it's just a matter of practicality, that the obedience is really better if it's needed as a second step in the training, not the primary step in the training.
Thank you.